Welcome to Primitive Reflexes in Reading. What does one have to do with the other? So we're going to follow an agenda here. First of all, of course, welcome. And then I'd kind of like to introduce you to myself and to our other speaker, Kasie Zoll. I'm Maria Davis Perkins, and I am a speech-language pathologist, and I focus on writing skills for the struggling writer, and am particularly interested in literacy, the relationship between reading and writing. So Kasie is also a friend of mine, as well as a speech-language pathologist. She has a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and with characteristics associated with dyslexia. So in the assessment her son had, there were revealed weaknesses in rapid naming, orthography, known as spelling, and in processing speed. So to give you a little background on Kasie, she's worked in the field of speech and language for 19 years. She had 6 of those years spent in the medical setting as a speech-language pathologist. Her current caseload is in the school system, and she works with children who have autism or diagnosis of a learning disability and or speech and artic delays or difficulties. Kasie is also on her district special ed focus group, and that group troubleshoots solutions pertinent to delivering special ed services to students in her district. And since, Kasie's son has difficulties with reading, or has had, I should say, she is especially sensitive to the needs of children having a diagnosis of learning disability. So let's go back for a second, and let me turn it over to Kasie.
Okay, so let's talk about primitive reflexes and reading. And what does one have to do with the other? How are they related? So reading, let's start with reading. Reading is networking, right? Incoming information from different neural systems come together, and all the relevant information about how a word works, how it looks, how it sounds, what it means. This information is tightly bound together, and that's by Sally Shaywitz, 2020. That allows us to understand what we read. So when we read, what does it look like? Those are the letters. What does it sound like? That's the phonologic system that we hear. What does it mean? That's the vocabulary, the memories that we have stored with the vocabulary. And all of this information needs to communicate through these neural pathways so that we can automatically understand what that writing on the page means. Reading is based, it's an automatic activity. When we are reading fluently, we are reading automatically. That's what reading is. And so what does that have to do with reflexes? Well, let's talk a little bit about what primitive reflexes are. Primitive reflexes reflect a neural network development in our brain. Primitive reflexes are involuntary movement patterns that are present at birth, and they become dormant, or what we say integrated, before the child reaches 12 months of age. So when we think of that, so our reflexes, think about an infant, and we talk about they're reaching their milestones. When an infant does tummy time, they're lifting their heads, they eventually learn to roll over, they'll eventually sit up and maybe start to crawl. These are all developmental milestones the child will move through, hopefully in succession, and demonstrate both use and integration of these reflexes. So what happens is as the child is learning these volitional movements and controlling themselves, be able to control their movements, there's no need for this reflex, and it becomes integrated. So integration occurs because sensory and motor neural networks develop and coordinate, and they allow more complicated movements and reactions to the outside world, to outside stimulus. Reflexes are important because they're a survival mechanism, but when we don't need them, they can be integrated and they give way to more conscious and volitional movement. Those are what primitive reflexes are. They begin very early in utero. There are a number of primitive reflexes that affect learning and reading. One of the more important ones that we'll talk about a little bit is the Moro reflex. So McDonald, 2019, is an occupational therapist, and she talks about the importance of the Moro primitive reflex as an example. The Moro, it should say Moro reflex, is an involuntary reaction to an outside threat. This reflex also plays an important role in the infant's taking its first breath. So the Moro reflex actually begins to develop probably about 9 weeks early, in its earliest stage in utero. And it's believed to develop and play a protective role in the infant as they're developing in utero. Once the baby's born, this reflex helps the baby, plays a part in the baby's taking their first breath. And in the first couple months of life, you're going to see this reflex present. So a sudden loud noise or a change in an infant's visual field will result in the reaction that indicate the Moro is still there or is present. And so this reaction is going to be the baby throwing their arms out, extending their legs, and then coming back in. And then if the child is upset enough, you're going to see the baby cry. Okay, and so if you've ever been around a little baby that's not swaddled up and you do something sudden in their vision field or you have a lot of noise, you're going to see them kind of startle like this. And if you upset them enough, they're going to cry. That's the Moro reflex. That's the Moro reflex being present. Okay.
So Kasie, what's it look like when a child shows us these reflexes before 12 months? Or let's talk about the Moro. What does it look like?
So the Moro would be considered, it's the startle reflex. It's also known as the startle reflex. So a child who is demonstrating a reflex or like a Moro response would have, you might see them startle or be insensitive, or I'm sorry, super sensitive to noise or to light or to touch, and you'll kind of, see a startle. And that is the Moro reflex showing up.
Is there a picture of that in your PowerPoint or?
No. Was there one in here?
Go down.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
no,
there's one.
Yeah,
yep,
there it is.
That's it right there. The fanning or clenching of the fingers, the extension of the extremities.
So if they don't have this reflex, or no, let's go back. If let's say you see a child at 6 months who has this reflex, I don't know if that's when it integrates or not, but if you have, how do you know that they have that reflex when they're an older kid?
So you're going to see signs that are consistent with, sometimes we say inflexibility, but really they don't like surprises. They don't like loud noises. They can have phobias related. That might be the child that doesn't like flushing the toilet because that noise is just startling to them.
Yeah,
those kinds. Those kinds of things. They can be timid, but a lot of times we see them to be overreactive.
Okay. So that kind of suggests then that there might be a more reflex issue, meaning that's still not integrated. Is that right?
Right. And it's important to know there are like over 70 reflexes. There are a lot of reflexes, okay. But the Moro tends to be one that we see. It's in the first tier, and it's typically integrated by the primitive reflex level between 2 and 4 months. And beyond that, we would say that it's not integrated, but it probably should be. And I think it's one that we see in a lot of our kiddos that we don't even know. Now I know, but I didn't back then, back when I didn't know about these things. And I could look back at my own son and see these kinds of startle reflexes. And if you look at some of our kiddos that have learning disabilities in general, sometimes you'll see those kinds of inflexibilities, phobias, overreactions, startles. It's an indication that the Moro might not be integrated.
So I don't know if your PowerPoint has it, but what do specialists do about that.
For the moral. Okay. So,
Well,
let's
this is
see.
reading, I guess.
Oh, yeah. So there are exercises that can be used for the moral. There are exercises that can be used for all of the primitive reflexes to help integrate them. There are exercises that you do on a daily basis, and really there are exercises that you typically would see a child do in their normal environment as they're growing up. But when we see these exercises, I'm sorry, these movements are not not done, and the reflex is not integrated, we can go back and work the child through these exercises they may have done in earlier development to help integrate that reflex.
Oh, okay. So you're building those passages or those message systems.
Right, right. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So primitive reflex affects responses to stimuli, including reading materials. So this is where we talk about how does this integration or lack of integration affect our reading. So the moral reflex is the only reflex connected to all other senses. So a lot of the other reflexes will primarily affect the vision or different feelings, but the moral goes across all areas. And so it's considered to be the building block of other reflexes in development. It's a really important one to be integrated and to have that building block for learning. If the moral reflex is not integrated, you can see differences in coordination, in different sensory perceptions, movement, and not just in movement, but also, I'm sorry, what do I want to say? In the perception of not just how the child is moving, so it's not just a movement reflex, but what the child is perceiving when they're seeing, hearing, and feeling things, how they perceive it inside, which results in that startle.
Did you
Did
you see something when your son was reading? And what did you see that kind of led to the
Yeah.
reflex?
So one thing I wanted to bring up about the moral is it's almost like I would call it like a stress response, right? And so the moral, we know when a child is reflexing with moral, it's been said that that their adrenal glands are going off, right? They're letting off their stress hormone. And so one other thing sometimes that we see with our Moro kids is that they tend to have our adrenal glands cause inflammation, right? They tend to have more allergies sometimes, and things like that. So that's just it's a neat thing. I'm by no means an expert on primitive reflexes, but because of my son, I've read so much and starting to connect the dots is just incredible. What these early development pieces mean for our learning as we get older. Yeah. I'm sorry, did that answer your question?
Well,
I went off on a tangent, didn't I?
We're going to get to a little more of the Q&A about your own experiences after we get some of the background. I don't know if there's another slide here or.
Yeah. Okay, so primitive reflexes affect responses to stimuli, including reading materials. So for McDonald, when a child's brain is healthy and developing, typically, let me see, one second here. Maturation and growth are automatic. So the child goes through a natural and instinctive movement patterns that assist the brain in learning and integrating primitive reflexes. So we see confusion in the brain when the child either doesn't go through the typical milestones or skips them altogether. We see holes. So for example, when a child moves from sitting to walking, skipping the crawling phase, and the central process for brain integration it's skipped. This jump in development can confuse further development, which requires the left and the right brain to coordinate and to execute more advanced movements.
Okay, so when we talk about coordinating, a child that doesn't coordinate the left and right brain, maybe that child would be one who might skip over words or, skip around within a word, maybe not picking up the end of the word, might picking up the first part of the word. Those are all possibilities, right?
Those are all possibilities, and they're all possibilities because they affect the vision, they affect how the child is using their eyes and their body in general. Oftentimes our kiddos with reading are going to have difficulty with crossing midline, and that's different reflexes, but it's all related to, yes, the eyes moving, and that's causing the issues of tracking, the eyes tracking on a line, and they start skipping or jumping ahead or not moving all the way to the left because we're not crossing into the left visual field.
Okay.
Or across. So yeah, so that's how the primitive reflex affects in that way. A skilled therapist can integrate retained reflexes by following the natural development process and mimicking activities and movements that were missed or done incorrectly. So here's what you were asking about, what kinds of exercise can you do? And there are all sorts of exercises that for Moro and for other reflexes, what I see done a lot are, it's a star, they might hear the starfish, popcorn, Superman. There are numerous different exercises for the different reflexes that you can work the child through sequentially. And the most important thing is daily exercises. And it helps the child get through and integrate those reflexes so that they have more control. And here's the thing, when you're reflexing, your brainstem is going off, and it's not allowing the frontal part of the brain to work because it's stopping and it's taking your energy, and you're fighting that reflex to be able to get the message into the more thinking part of your brains. So when you can stop that, then you're freeing up your ability and your network inside to communicate.
Okay. Before we go to that, why don't I share the screen now? So you need to stop share. Okay, so I have a document. Let's see if it's, oops, it's not showing. Give me a second to get it up for you. It had some things that a parent can check off. Why don't I show that at the end? I think right now, most of us would like to know what your experiences have been. So first of all, how did you know your son had any difficulty? What did you see, and how young was he?
So looking back in retrospect, I think there were signs when he was probably not far long after he was born, but I didn't recognize those until much later. Let's see, so my child was born, typical pregnancy, pretty typical delivery, long delivery, first time mom. It took a long time. Body didn't know what it wanted to do, but he was born a healthy boy, no problems. He, as an infant, he was just super sensitive to noise and sound. Okay. Definitely, a super overreactive child to some of these kinds of things. We used to say he was bossy because anything bothered him. He was a little bossy. But as he got older, in the first, let's just say in the first year of life, he's pretty typical development, other than kind of being sensitive to noise and to light. One other thing he didn't do, which was something that it's a midline issue, was he never held his bottle. Right? So he's typically developing boy, no big red flags, but he didn't hold his bottle ever. And so as a first time mom, I didn't care. I was happy to hold my baby and feed him. On occasion, I needed him to hold his bottle once he was older, and we did try, strategies to kind of prop him and show him, but he probably would have starved if we didn't hold his bottle for him. So that was kind of, maybe should have been a red flag when he was little. He was also not a crawler. So that was another thing he did not do. He did not crawl when he was little. And I think it wasn't until just about the stage when he was walking, right about 1, I was reading an article that said your children should always crawl, and children who don't, this is kind of a red flag for reading. And as a speech pathologist, of course, for whatever reason, I hadn't read that before, but I did then, and I certainly tried to get him to crawl, but by then he was almost walking, and he had no intent of getting on the ground, especially since he had never done it before. He was not about to do it. So we skipped that. Here's that hole, right? So we start seeing
Yeah.
these holes. Didn't hold his bottle, didn't crawl. I still wasn't too concerned about him. Um, one thing that was not a red flag for bad, he started talking probably near 6 months, his first word. A meaningful word. He said apple with no L, but apple. Reached for an apple that he wanted, was his favorite food. And, you know, and that's where his first word started coming in. So that was a good thing. And it was kind of a nice piece of information to know that cognitively he was developing, because later on that was questioned because of how much he was struggling. Yeah. So typically, you know, other than the bottle and the crawling in the first year, he was pretty typical. In the second year, also pretty typical, still a little bossy, meaning he was sensitive to these noises, lights, change in schedule. He started becoming a picky eater. And just at about 18 months old, we started seeing something different. Still didn't know what it was, but becoming more sensitive to feeling and touching things, doing these things in his chair where he would rock so hard that his high chair would, you know, move around the floor. This is not typical. If your child is doing that, this is not typical. So those kinds of things started showing up. I used to play with him a lot, and as a child he would become very frustrated, or as a little boy he would become very frustrated if he couldn't get his puzzle pieces in correctly or figure out how to get the blocks to go together. Very frustrated, more than normal. So that was something that was another red flag. He also and this is different. I'm not even so sure it's related to the dyslexia, but he didn't have a normal play pattern. He never really picked up on rolling a car and using it, to play.
Oh, wow.
Yes, he never really did the block stacking. That just wasn't his thing. If I built blocks, he was more than happy to knock it down, but he wasn't about to put them up. Those kinds of things. These are things your kiddos need to learn. They need to do it. The stacking of the blocks and the rolling of the cars and those kinds of things is typical play. And if they're not doing it, you've got to ask yourself why. So those are some of the real early signs I saw with him. As he got older, into preschool age, difficulty with paying attention to letters, labeling the letters. He certainly knew his letters. If I gave him a label, he could give me a sound, but he couldn't label the symbol.
Okay.
And that was the same thing with numbers. He could not label the number, but he could add to 15 if I gave him verbally the numbers and maybe marbles or rocks to count. He could do that.
Okay, so when you say label the symbol or label the number, do you mean tell you the name of it?
Yes.
Okay.
So if I would show him a card of a number or a letter or show him in a book, he could not tell me the letter.
The
name of the letter. But if I would say, what does A say? He could tell me. What does B say? He could tell me. He could count to, by the time he was 2, he was counting to, probably 20. I know he was adding to about 12 when he was 2. But only verbally, nothing with a written symbol.
Okay.
But I chalked it up to, well, he's 2. He shouldn't even be adding anyway. I wasn't too worried about it until I came to preschool and he wanted nothing to do with a pencil or a piece of paper at all.
Okay.
And so that's where we started seeing some differences. Yeah. And definitely the inflexibility. So he had a hard time. He could follow the teacher's schedule, but if there was a change in schedule or something like that, definitely this inflexibility, this overreaction to the change. So this was a child that definitely by preschool, he would have these really overreactions to something he didn't like. So this was a child that I had to sit on the ground and squeeze until he would get through his, his tantrum or his
Okay.
crying thing. And that was the only thing that would calm him, was a squeeze. And I could get the tantrum to go away sooner if I did that than if I just let him flail and leave him alone, So these were red flags they came up with my kid.
So when did you go seek out some help? When did you even have a clue? Because those were all red flags, but when did you actually go get someone to help you? And how did you how did you go about that?
So in addition to some of these difficulties, I had noticed he was also having trouble with, I didn't know that it was trouble at the time, but he was doing this funny thing with his eyes where he would kind of look sideways, look up, kind of roll his eyes. And we thought maybe he needed glasses. One other red flag I forgot to say is he wouldn't play with the ball, bounce a ball, catch a ball, anything like that. And if we, tossed him something like a beach ball, he would, startle. Don't do that, overreaction. So another sign, your kids should play with balls, be able to catch a ball, nice soft beach ball, by that age. So it was right before kindergarten. We went to have his eyes checked. I suspected there was something going on with his eyes, and we took him to an optometrist. They checked his eyes and they said, "No, Mom, nothing is wrong." Now here's a red flag. While sitting in the optometrist's office, the optometrist projected like a shadow image, probably maybe 9 feet in front of him on the wall. A nice large shape of, I think the first one was a house, the second one was a cake with a candle. My child could not see it. He didn't know what it was. He couldn't see anything on the wall.
Wow.
Yes.
How did he pass that vision test if he couldn't?
So the same optometrist showed him some letters and numbers, and by then he was labeling letters and numbers, and showed them kind of like you or I might do a vision test, right? Or a screen. Cover one eye, cover the other eye. Gave him some up close stuff and said, "He's fine." And I said, "Yeah, but he can't see. He's telling you he can't see that over there." And he said, "He's got white coat syndrome. He's just nervous. He's in the doctor's office. He's fine. Go home. Here's some allergy medicine. Go home," for his eyes. So we started kindergarten without glasses or anything. And he struggled, really, really struggled in kindergarten. I had a pre-talk with the teacher and said, "Hey, look, I know he's struggling. Just keep me updated. Let's support him however we need to." By October, they were sounding the alarm. He's struggling. But because he was a bright boy, he was able to keep up with what he needed to learn because he could hear it. Not because he could see it, but because he could hear it. So he was getting by that way. We were doing a lot of homework at home. It would take hours to do his homework, right? He would cry. The pencil would break. He'd have this really tight grip on his pencil, and the lead would break. Even the big fat pencils that kindergartners use, crayons, those kinds of things. Come October, I started occupational therapy with him. Took him to be assessed. They found some areas of need. We started working. We did that for several months, and by springtime, I didn't see much of a difference, and neither did the teacher. And they weren't doing anything a whole lot different than what we were already doing at home. So while, we were working hard, we just didn't see any outcome. So we stopped the occupational therapy probably in the spring of his kindergarten year. Around the same time, I had the talk with the teacher, and she says, "Well, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew he's struggling. He's in the bottom one or two, he's probably the bottom 1 or 2 students in my class."
Oh, wow. That is tough on a child that's bright.
Yeah, a punch in the stomach to the mom, too,
Yeah,
to hear that, right? So we had an SST, and to prepare the information, a student study team meeting to write down the concerns we had seen throughout the year, what we had done, and prepare that information for the first grade teacher so they knew what was coming their way. So he went to first grade. Similar issues existed with, difficulty writing, not picking up on the reading. A lot of the sight words that our kiddos, start learning in first grade, he would just kind of guess at what the word was based on the word shape, but he really was not, I don't think, seeing even the symbols. 3 words on a single page, he could not read, even track on 3 words on a single page. Large letters, first grade letters. So naturally, we have a meeting with the teacher. She says, yes, this is how I'm accommodating for him. This is how he's struggling. I agree. There's a problem. But the school was not ready to assess because he was doing well, because auditorily he was learning, but he wasn't doing anything writing. So by then we had seen another optometrist right around the start of first grade, who actually not an optometrist, an ophthalmologist, because I knew something was going on with the eyes. I just couldn't figure it out. Ophthalmologist said, took him to Chalk, actually, a child, great place. A great doctor, seemed very knowledgeable, tested him and said, no, Mom, you're fine. He's fine. Take him back to school and, let the school handle if he has learning needs. He doesn't have vision needs. The only thing is, as we walked out the door, he did this kind of funny thing with his eyes again. And the doctor says, is that what you're talking about? And I said, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So he says he's making a prism out of the side of his eye or something to that effect. And maybe these glasses will help. So here are the glasses, but other than that, he's doing fine. So they send me on my merry way. No improvement. So I was talking to a friend OT, not in the school system, but another, outside of the school system. And she says, hey, look, there's this type of therapy that vision optometrists do. It's called vision therapy, and their behavior, their discipline is a behavior discipline like ours, and you really need to take him to see a developmental optometrist. So I think that was where we started growing, right? So we went to this optometrist. She assessed him. Their intake forms is where all the difficulties. So of course I checked just about everything on her list. She looked at me like I was a little nuts, and she took him back to test him. Sure enough, she came back after 3 sessions of testing, and she said, so he's got this long list of vision issues, and visual perception, visual motor, visual acuity, visual timing, all kinds of things. And she says, I can't tell you which one is affecting the other. They're all working together, and we need to treat them all together. So we started vision therapy. And let me tell you, that was the best thing ever. This is where my son started growing. In vision therapy, we also started working on primitive reflexes. So this is where it comes in.
Now, I remember you saying once that you had him see a psychologist?
Yes. So that's further down the road.
Oh, wow.
Yes, that's further down the road. There's a lot to get there. I'll talk quicker. Okay. So we started vision therapy about 8 to 10 weeks in. I started noticing a huge difference. So he wasn't able to run more than 40 or 50 yards without falling. So that got better. He started catching and bouncing a ball. So his depth perception was off, and we were working on that. And one of the big things, we were driving to vision therapy, and he says, hey, Mom, those mountains over there, have those always been there? Mountains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, those have always been there.
What was it like for him?
Amazing, right? So I talked to the vision therapist, and she said, well, we're starting to open up his vision system. So he may have always, seen it, right, getting the image on the retina, but he never perceived it, possibly,
Wow, recognizing.
Recognize it. So huge growth. I mean, vision therapy was amazing for him. And once we figured out that he was getting, a single image on the retina, and he's starting to track words, large and spaced, but starting to track, we knew that we could address reading and writing. So when we started doing that, his reading and writing was still not coming along.
Okay.
So that's when I went, okay, so this is more than just vision. That was a piece of it, but now there's something else. And that's when we started going the dyslexia route.
Okay, so what does that mean? Did you go to the psychologist at that point?
We did. So by then we were in 2nd grade. And I had been approached by the teacher that said, he's struggling so much, and how come he hasn't been assessed? And I said, well, because he's been doing well enough. He can hear and he's learning auditorily. This is not uncommon for our kids, right? It's not uncommon for them to get to third and fourth grade because they were able to learn auditorily. But then beyond that, it becomes more difficult. And he was falling into that same pattern. So I requested an assessment at that point. From kindergarten to then, it had been a wait and see. The school wanted to wait and see. Not me, the school. I wanted to get him help. So they came back and said, nothing's wrong.
Now, wait a minute. Which assessment said that?
This was our school assessment.
Oh.
Our school assessment came back and said nothing was wrong. Of course, I strongly disagreed. I was seeking outside opinions. I was in a unique situation, and I didn't want to cause discord with his school and with his people within his team. I happened to work in the same district, and I really didn't want to make enemies. I just wanted to help my kid, So I started seeking some outside opinions, and I went to a place called Stoll Learning Center.
Okay.
And they do, they work with children who have learning disabilities. So they did kind of like a functional assessment to see how he was doing. They also worked on primitive reflexes. And so this is where it started coming together again, right? So they definitely found the same needs and issues and concerns that I had, and also almost all of the reflexes they tested, he was not integrated. My son was not integrated on, I think there was one reflex he was integrated of the 17 that they tested that they were looking at. So we hit primitive reflexes really heavy with that.
So I think you said in the description, I think I said that, your son had been diagnosed with ADHD and characteristics associated with dyslexia. Who made that diagnosis?
So after having confirmation that I wasn't crazy, there was something going on, I took these reports back to the school and I said, hey, look, like you're not finding these things, but these other, people that are helping me are seeing the same thing, and this is how we're addressing, and I really want to look at it again. And they said no. So I requested an outside evaluation.
Okay.
In the IEE, which is your right as a parent. If you have a child in the school system and you're not agreeing with the assessment, try to work with your team. But if it doesn't work out, that's another option, is to ask for an outside assessment and to see if there's anything different. So he was assessed by Dr. Mitch Perlman in San Diego.
Perlman, okay.
Dr. Perlman. And let me tell you, it was the best thing ever. I, as his mom, had my own suspicions of, definitely dysgraphia, and dysgraphia doesn't live by itself. So, probably the dyslexia thing. Okay. And I'm so glad that he, I told him when we went, I said, I don't want you to tell me what I think it is. I want you to tell me what you think it is. Okay. This is not an assessment where I want to twist your arm to get eligibility, to get something at school. I really want to know what is going on with my kid. So he said, well, don't worry, because that's what I do anyway. I'm not going to tell you it's something that it's not. So he assessed him and found that there was ADD, not ADHD, not the hyperactivity. He's not that kid off the wall.
I met him. Yeah.
Very calm, he says, but his brain is going 100 miles an hour. So his IQ was, on the higher end of average, maybe borderline gifted type of thing.
Uh-huh.
And his mind is going 100 miles an hour, he said. So if he's looking at you and nodding, don't believe he's listening. So basically, the ADHD piece, or the ADD piece, not the hyperactivity. So the inattentive type. There was also a pattern of the dyslexia pieces. He didn't feel that it was the only thing or that it existed by itself. But there was the difficulty with the orthography or the spelling and the processing speed.
So in dyslexia, at least in Shaywitz's case, she talks about it being a problem with handling sounds and not being able, phonemic awareness, where you're manipulating sounds, or you can manipulate. You can go, cat is 3 sounds, that's just one of them, right? Okay, so she says that, but your son sounds like he has a sound system. Like if you said, What are the 3 sounds in cat? Could he have done it then?
He could have given you the sounds,
But not the
but
name.
not the letters.
The name.
Not the names of the letters. Yeah,
Okay,
or the
wow.
name of the word. Yeah, and he was not great at. He could manipulate the sounds, but
Mhm.
he couldn't hear the similarities. He couldn't rhyme.
Oh,
He was
wow.
not
So it wasn't,
rhyming.
so that's a different aspect of phonemic awareness. Yeah.
He was not rhyming, and he could not spell. So, but
So
that
he,
goes back to the symbol, right?
yeah,
That
attaching
goes,
the printed thing to the sound.
yeah,
Yeah. Or
yeah.
sound to the print. Okay, so did the Stoll Center tell you then that primitive reflexes was at the core of this whole thing?
Yeah, so they had a really interesting, and by the way, the way I got there was I was looking to
Oh,
pull
yeah.
the way I got there was I was looking to pull my son out of school. I
Oh,
was looking to find, and he was experiencing some not great experiences with peers,
okay.
and it wasn't being handled, and maybe some things with adults that were also maybe not in his best interest at school.
Okay.
Um, and so I was looking to neutralize some of those situations for him and put him in a different placement. And in that process, I came across Stoll Learning Center, which it looks like they have a homeschooling program. But they also have a program where you can go into their clinic, and they weren't too far from where I live. So after spending a good number of weeks, really up till 3 in the morning, researching these places, I went
Yeah.
to a parent meeting to learn about them a little bit. Wonderful place. I mean, they really helped us a lot with my son. But one of the things they talked about was what they call core learning skills,
Mm.
and what they are, they're primitive reflexes. They address the primitive reflexes, and they explain how this is the core, the building blocks of what we need to start learning. And they explain how, you can't expect a child to sit and hold a pencil and, use their eyeball.
Oh, we just froze. Casey, you froze. Adam, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Maria. Her video froze for me as well.
Okay, I can try to chat with her.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, for some reason you froze, so we may have missed something.
Oh, I just said that basically Stoll was, they talked about the primitive reflexes being the base or the building blocks of what we need. And if you have a child that doesn't have those integrated, they're reflexing, they're in a state of reflex all the time. And they're not present to be able to sit calmly, to hold a pencil, to write, to use their eyes. All these systems are reflexing, and it's impacting their ability to function, basically.
Yeah,
And so
oops, they can't coordinate things together then.
they
I
can't
mean, with their
coordinate.
eyes, with what they hear, with what they see, and
Here's where
wow,
that system falls apart, right?
right.
And I was kind of trying to think of an analogy, and how does that work? And I thought of like a delivery system, right? So UPS, FedEx, the US
Not
mail
delivering
system,
the right package.
right? Amazon, they would be like, 100% integrated in their reflexes, right? I mean, they got stuff to you real quick. So, but here's the deal: in an efficient delivery system, every person in there has their job. They're effective. They're efficient. They move the package from one platform to another to the truck. It's delivered, right? And they're
Mhm.
moving. But if you have one of those, a loose link in there, your package is going to be late. It's
Oh,
not going to
that's a
make it.
good
It's not going
analogy.
to make it on the truck, and it might make it to your neighbor's house instead of yours. That's what's going on in the brains of our little guys who are not integrated.
Integrated.
And a lot
Yeah.
of us work perfectly fine, and have some reflexes that are not integrated. But if we have some main reflexes that are not integrated, or a lot of them that are not integrated, that's going to affect how we function for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm
I learned
wondering
a
how,
lot about myself reading about
I
these
re,
reflexes.
I seem to remember when I was talking to Casey a year ago that you said that you got this book that told you like an assessment, and then
Yeah.
you gave that
Can
test,
I
if you
show it
will.
to you?
Oh, do you have it? Okay, cool.
I do. I don't
Oh,
know.
that
Can
book.
you see it? Yeah. Primitive reflex training.
Oh, so you
Yeah,
gave that test to your husband and your other children?
I did.
What
I did.
what did you find?
We all had some reflexes that were not integrated. All of
Wow.
us did. We all did, but it definitely. And here's the deal: you can. It's kind of integration is kind of to a degree, right? So you can be not
Okay.
integrated at all, or kind of somewhat integrated. So it's kind of a spectrum. Like, it's not like yes or no. It's
Okay.
how integrated and
Levels.
levels. Yeah, and um, I found that we all had, maybe one, two that were not so integrated, but my poor Joaquin, or I'm sorry, my poor child, 17, all of them, none of them were integrated,
Oh my
you know.
gosh.
And so actually, I had given him this test before we went to our Stoll Learning Center. And I
Oh.
thought, there is no way. I have to be wrong. There's no way. I must be overscoring. I must be, you know, doing this wrong. So I didn't tell them I had done this. This was just,
Oh.
I didn't want to influence anything. I didn't want to be told, oh, you think something's wrong with your child, so yes, something's wrong with your child. No, I just wanted, to know what their perception was. And basically, they found the same thing I had found,
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah, yeah. And so I'll be honest, when I first heard about it, I thought, I don't know if I buy into it. I'm not so sure. But after reading some of these books and kind of just reading online, kind of trying to triangulate this information, definitely there's something there to primitive reflexes and how they impact our learning
Can you
for sure.
share an exercise or tell us about one, let's say at the beginning when you start working with Stoll, what was one of those exercises? Do you have something there that you can?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the exercises I don't have it here to show you. One of the exercises, all sorts of exercises. One of them was called starfish. So where we would have him curl up, or is that popcorn? No, it's popcorn. Sorry. Where we have him curl up, and then he would pop out. He'd be on the ground, and he would just kind of pop his arms out. And the
That's like
goal
the moral.
here, yeah. And the goal here was to do a very controlled movement with symmetry in the arms
Okay.
and the legs, right? Um, and then he would come back in. So he would do it both slow, real slow, and then he would do fast. So that was one of them. Another one was a starfish, and the starfish would be seated in the chair, and he would kind of have to sort of extend his arms and his legs out. So that was another one. There was Superman, so laying on the ground and lifting
Putting
his
him.
arms and his legs and his hands off the ground. Yeah. So all these sorts of exercises that you would see,
Okay.
movements that you see in an infant, but
Yeah.
walking through those exercises. Yeah.
Okay. So when he was doing the popcorn, I recognize it looked like a startle reflex, but what was he integrating there?
I
Was
believe
it?
it was Moro. You're testing me, Maria. I
No,
don't.
no, that's not what I meant. I
So
didn't
many.
mean the
No, no, no.
reflex.
Go
I
ahead.
mean is what kinds of neuro centers was he putting together? Was it touch? Was it sound? It wasn't sound. Was it a motor, sensory motor, where you are in space? I mean, you said the
Well,
Moro has all of the senses, involves all the senses, right? All the sensory
yeah.
inputs and outputs. Maybe that was it.
So the reflexes exercises are to integrate. So it's to give way or to teach yourself to have volitional movement versus over that startle. So that was what I understood.
Right.
What the exercises were for. Yeah, to,
Uh,
to teach that volitional control, basically, that
okay, so on
over those
demand
movements.
when he wanted to do it. Now, did they do anything with sound in his reaction to it? I'm just curious.
There were exercises that we did other things for sound that were more related to listening with like a headset.
Hmm.
There were primitive reflexes that we did that are related to, like, the startle sound. So those would be the Moro exercises. If they startle to sound, if they startle to um, light and those kinds of things. But it's more like the system's overreaction to those things. So that's what they're trying to to help the system integrate.
Sounds like they went before they kind of helped integrate so they didn't have that reaction, but also by doing all the preliminary, let's keep using the word integration, making all those neuro connections work together, that resulted in him not having to startle.
That's right. Yes.
That's kind of interesting, considering it was a reaction to a sound or,
isn't it?
yeah, that's interesting. But
Yeah.
also make sure to look at kids differently in our field. And I'm sure as a parent, if you have a child who's struggling, that would be a big deal. Now, okay, so I asked you about the earlier exercises. Now, is your son still getting any kind of therapy?
So we're still doing vision therapy.
Okay.
He wasn't. I'll be honest. So when we go to Stoll, when we went to Stoll, they kind of lined out a program and they said, "This is what we think your child is, going to need to get through." It wasn't just primitive reflexes. So another analogy I have, right? So here he did some reading. He did, he started out with. Let me back up for a second. My child, by the time we had gotten to Stoll, had become very resistant to any kind of intervention or learning. He had already built this negative thing about himself. He didn't like seeing his work on the wall in the classroom. He would become upset if he knew his work was going to be displayed. So there was already some emotion. He was bright enough to know that he wasn't writing like the other kids.
Yeah.
So there were some emotional things we had to get through. So when we started Stoll, he was very open. He knew he needed help. But at the moment it was time to work, it was, we were challenging him. It's a challenging thing to do something that's difficult for you. And he would shut down. So that was a big thing we had to work on to get past. And they said, he's one of our more resistant ones, and he wouldn't run out of the room or be,
have a tantrum,
misbehave or no, he would just say, I don't know.
That's the passive refusal is pretty powerful.
Yeah, I don't know. And so we had to do all kinds of work schedules. And I said, yeah, this is kind of what we see at home. Same thing, and this is how I have to motivate him, and with baby steps. And so it took a while to get past that. But they started with, making the alphabet out of clay. So this is kind of the Davis program stuff. And those sorts of things. So he did the whole alphabet that way. He was feeling successful. We would follow up and do similar stuff at home. He was doing the primitive reflexes, and then they had an auditory system, a passive listening system. And there's some, agreement or disagreement about that within our field, if it works. Yeah. But here's what I said. Going into the system, there were some things that I might have agreed or not agreed with. But I said, it's like making a spaghetti sauce, right? You can make the spaghetti sauce with the tomato, the oil, the water. You could do it. It's not going to taste great, but you can do it. Or you can make a real spaghetti sauce, right? Your tomatoes and your herbs and your spices and your salt and your oils, and really make a great one. So it's not any one thing that's going to, you got to put all the pieces together, and you got to trust the recipe, for it to work for your child.
Yeah. And he had shown some success, so I understand that. If this is what they say he needs, then let's do it.
Then let's do it, yeah.
What kind of a sound thing was it? Do you remember?
And so it was a program called Simonis. They don't use it anymore. I think there were some technical issues with it, so they moved on to another one, and I forgot what it was called. But while we were there, we used Simonis.
What did he hear? What was it was passive listening, so.
Yeah, it's passive listening. And so what it was a combination, or it was there were a series of CDs. At the time that we started, they had just switched over to making it an all digital system. So we would download these songs. But within months, they were using CDs. And what they are, it's a combination of classical music, nature sounds, evening sounds, and morning sounds. It sounds beautiful. Sounds like you're in nature, really. But what the idea, like spa, it sounds like spa music. But the idea was that they would manipulate the frequencies and the sounds within the music to alert or suppress certain things within the auditory system.
Oh, that's interesting.
And you know what? I understand the research, and I understand that one case doesn't change what the research says. But let me tell you, I saw changes in him when he used the system. I saw when he was doing the calming music that he was more calm. I saw that when he was using the more alerting type of music that he was more alert. And so they would go through basically a system. It's not a hierarchy, basically like a sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only for a few minutes a day. It wasn't like, listen to this all day as long as you want. No, it was only a few minutes, a very prescribed amount of time. And you had to record, how he did, what his response was, how he acted, in the time before and after. So they're looking for, did it impact how he was behaving, or, did it change anything? And certainly, I mean, from our notes that we were taking, you could see the difference.
What grade was he in when this happened?
So he attended this program. He started at the end of second grade, and he ended, I want to say, in fourth grade.
Okay, 2 years.
It was closer to 3. We
Okay.
did end of summer. It was closer to 3. Oh, you know what? He did do the it might have been like 2.5. We did 3 summer intensives. So the way this
Wow.
program works is that you go, depending on your child's needs, you go X amount of days based on how many hours they think they need to reach their goals.
Right.
And so his prescription was, 3 days, and some of it was for, and they divide up the time to address these different needs. And he was already in vision therapy. So I
Yeah.
kind of talked to them and said, I really want to address that part over there, but you guys can address these other pieces. So
Okay.
during the school week, we went a couple times a week and did this stuff. And then over summertime, we did intensives. He was going 5 days a week, 2.5 hours a day.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
that's
it's a lot of
intensive.
work. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work.
And you were doing exercises at home too, right?
We were doing primitive reflex exercises at home, which were assigned not only by Stoll actually, but also by our
By
vision
vision.
therapist. So I had to kind of work with them and say, okay, this is what we're doing here, or this is what we're doing there, so
Oh,
that we
good.
could kind of work together. And then we had vision therapy homework too, daily. So
Yeah.
getting past these struggles, it's not easy. My heart goes out to any parent dealing with this, but if you stick with it, you're going to see progress. Stick with the recipe. It's not any one thing. You got to do all of it.
So when did he start being able to name letters, read a little bit? Because if he wasn't naming letters, chances are good he wasn't reading. So when did that start to kick in? About what grade was he?
So he was kindergarten. He was able to say letters by kindergarten.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it
That's
was
not,
by kindergarten. Large letters. Now,
right.
if it was something small on a page, like let's say a 16 font word,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's about kindergarten age font, and it was maybe 3 letters. He might not be able to get through all the 3 letters. So that's what I was
Okay.
talking.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
did he know the symbol? He knew the symbols. By kindergarten, he knew the symbols for his letters. He was doing a lot of writing reversals,
Okay.
numbers and letters. But his tracking wasn't down yet. So if you show him a 3-letter word, he could probably not get to each 3-letter,
So,
the 3 letters in the word.
so at that point, he probably couldn't read a word or too many words.
So this is where the sight word reading was coming in, is that he was seeing the sight word. He wasn't reading the letters. He was seeing it as a picture, right? As we know, some of
Okay.
our kids do that, right?
Okay.
It's an image. And so he was able to read some of his sight words that way. And where the confusion,
Memorized it.
he memorized it. And the problem was that he was then just guessing at his words. And, if a word had a similar word shape, that was the word,
Yep.
and
Yep.
a lot of reversal. So a lot of, saw was, no was on,
Oh, yeah.
those kinds of things. Yeah.
So when did he stop doing that with simple words? About when did you see that in the process? About what?
Oh, probably end of
After?
second grade, maybe
Wow.
third grade.
Yeah, big struggle.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I believe he's no longer getting therapy, right?
We're doing vision therapy still.
Oh, you are.
Actually,
Okay.
we are doing vision therapy, some primitive reflex stuff. We did, when he was in Stoll, they gave us, we think this is how long it's going to take.
Oh, okay.
Because of his resistance and some of those kinds of things and the progress, obviously you might be moving a little bit faster or slower. His program was on the longer end. And it took a little bit longer than we predicted. Toward the end, he was doing better with reading. We were going to start incorporating some math, and he really wanted to play baseball. And so we took a break from Stoll to let him play baseball because
Okay.
I felt that it was time.
Social.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was time.
Yeah, I think
So we did
before you said that socially he wasn't, back in maybe first grade, he wasn't interacting as much with the kids, something like that. And you
Yes.
said some peer pressure too at some point,
Yes,
right?
so typical of our kids. And, you know, a lot of times it gets mistaken as, you know, on the autism spectrum. And even I did that
Okay.
myself, right? I even had those own concerns
Fears.
myself. Yeah, my own fears, my own concerns. But it, in again, learning about these primitive reflexes, we learned that our kiddos even have trouble with social interaction.
Can't tell.
Even really, they can't
Yeah.
tell.
It's
Even related to vision, they can't follow the movement in the room, even, you know, sometimes. They're not perceiving the facial expressions. They don't have the motor skills to hang with their friends. They don't have the motor skills to play the kickball, the handball, the do the puzzles on the floor. That was one thing my own child struggled with. He would take all the puzzle pieces because he, you know, if he had his one puzzle piece, it would take him the whole time to figure out where that went. And he wanted to participate, so he would take more than his share. You know, this was something we had to work with him on. And then what happens is that, unfortunately, when your kids are younger and they have these struggles, they build this reputation with their peers, right? Of being the kid that they can't get along with anybody else, or the kid that's in trouble. He wasn't always so much in trouble. It was more he couldn't mesh, he couldn't hang.
He just didn't.
And he got that reputation, and so it's hard to change that. It's very hard, and you know,
yeah. So you're seeing that particular aspect change in him now?
So he, because of those struggles, he did go through some counseling and through some social skills support to kind of help him. Before I even understood this was related to the whole, you know, the whole puzzle. And so that really helped him. He's a smart boy, so he was able to pick up on, oh, this is what they want me to do, you know, and I'm not hearing it from mom, I'm hearing it from someone else. And so I think that really helped him. He has friends now he, you know, wants to hang out with. Well, we're in quarantine, so, you know, now he talks to them over the computer.
Zooming.
Yeah, it's not very helpful. He's still not, you know, he's not that kid that likes a rough and tough play. He's not, you know, he played baseball and he was like, it's okay. I can take it or leave it. It just wasn't his thing, but he gave it a try. And that's so much more than he would have done before. Another thing, Maria, was that I wanted to mention was we did do also part of his assessment process. I forgot to bring up was we did an auditory assessment for him as well, which was a weakness Stoll had found. And so we did go to an audiologist, and they did find, you know, what they found was there was some auditory processing difficulties, but it was not central auditory processing disorder. It was more related to language. So here we go again with this is typical. This is not uncommon in our kids with dyslexia.
I wonder what kind of test that was, because I know I used to work down the hall from audiology. They can do a competing words, competing sentences, but how did they figure out it was language? Language to me means understanding.
Yeah, well, and so
you have to pick it up first. You have to process it, recognize it before you understand it. But where was the breakdown?
I feel like more recently I've read about, you know, the auditory field really kind of parsing out what is CAPD or, you know, and what is more language related. And so she did say there's definitely a processing piece going on, but it's more related to his processing of language in background noise. So when there was competing noise, he could not extract the signal, couldn't understand what was going on. And so she said this is more, you know, leaning toward the language realm of difficulty.
It could affect your language, that's for sure.
It can affect your language. And so, but also it's common with our kiddos to have these kinds of learning disabilities like dyslexia.
Yeah.
So my point with that was that she said, I really want you to work on things that are going to help him integrate both sides of his brain, right? Where do we hear this? Primitive reflex training. It's the same thing. You know,
only auditory.
that this was auditory. But
Wow.
But she's, but again, it's about movement. So she said, I want to see him swimming, try martial arts,
Okay. Let
try
me.
playing the piano. She gave me a list of things. So fortunately, I knew that there were motor planning issues with him, related to, so I already had him in martial arts.
Oh,
And
cool.
he was already a swimmer because we have a swimming pool in the family and we never wanted him to drown. So, from the minute we could stick him in the pool, we were making sure he was swimming by the time he was 1. So I wasn't worried about that.
Oh, great.
But he couldn't ride a bike to save his life, right? So here's that, that
Balance.
not only balance, but it's a cross motor, right?
Okay.
In the brain. And so our brains need that to read. We need our hemispheres to communicate. Our corpus callosum needs that interhemispheric freeway needs to work. And so those exercises, martial arts, swimming, riding a bike, those are all addressing that cross motor integration, as is, getting those reflexes addressed and suppressed.
How old is Joaquin now?
He is coming up on 12.
Okay, so all along the way, he knew he was having trouble.
He knew as
Okay,
early as
yeah.
first grade, easily.
Well, what I see with the high school kids that I work with or worked with is that when there's so many failure experiences, they first response is I can't. And how is he doing?
It's learned me because
Oh,
it's
it's
it's less
experience,
painful.
failure,
It's less
failure.
painful to say I
Yeah,
can't
I
than to
know.
experience that.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you see a change there?
Oh yes. I mean, he is so more willing to put himself out there. We did a lot of confidence building, a lot of teaching him that, it's okay to be different. We all have our strengths, we all have our
Yeah,
weaknesses.
yeah.
I think teaching him to understand, not hide it from him. I got a lot of pushback from some people in the school system saying, when you tell your child that, you're going to make him feel bad. You're going to make him believe he has this problem. And
Well,
I
when you
didn't buy
can't
it.
escape the problem, I mean,
Yeah.
that was tough. That little guy, well, he's not
Yeah.
that little anymore.
So we talked about it a
So
lot.
I don't know if he's there.
He
Let's see.
is.
Oh, he is. Oh, great. Are we going to meet him?
Let me grab him for you. Give me 1 second.
Okay, we'll take a 5-second break. No, go ahead and we'll take a break for here for a minute. Can you hear me? Okay, she did. Okay, so we are coming to the end. Let me go ahead while we wait for Joaquin and share the one slide. So I'll just go from here and just click to where we're supposed to be. What I wanted to let you know is, audience, that we do have some upcoming events. We've got 2 professors talking about a different way to teach grammar for parents, teachers, and so forth who are struggling with that particular task with their own children. And then we have a tentative one for play and literacy, where a child developmental specialist will hopefully be here, and we'll discuss what play does and then how that relates to literacy. We'll actually both be doing that particular Zoomcast and informing it. Then we have a radio show in January. It's called Tapping Existing Neurolinguistic Skills to Ease the Writing Process. And that is one that I will be participating in and being interviewed by Dr. Holland, who has a skills program for teaching and tutoring. And the last 2 are hands-on workshop. We're planning to do a virtual workshop April or May on how to help your students unblock their writer's block. And actually, this is using some of the neurolinguistic skills, some of which we've talked about, to come up with thesis sentences, because kids often don't know where to go when you give them a topic. So we'll talk about how you can do that and make it happen fast. And then we have our hands-on in-person workshop coming up in September. So I'm going to refer you to the last part of this PowerPoint, which will also be available on our website. Let me go to the end before we meet Joaquin. And you, of course, here's some of the webinars, but also units, instructional modules, and so forth that we have. And we have announced that you can now download to keep our TalkWrite videos and instructional modules, which means that you can use them during your asynchronous time. And these modules and webinars are actually recommended for grade 6 and up, but it would help, I'm sure, teachers and tutors and others to, attend our Zoomcast in the meantime. So I'm going to sign, and one other thing, the Zoll resources. Kasie has provided these resources as places to look to get more information if you suspect that your child has some difficulties. Okay, so let me go back to Kasie. Hopefully that was a screen share that everybody saw. Okay, so this is
Can you hear me,
Joaquin.
Maria?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So hi, Joaquin.
This is Joaquin.
You gonna say hi?
Hi.
So I'm going to ask you a question, Joaquin. What would you tell other kids that are struggling, that might think things are hard?
If you practice, you can get better in the future.
It's a cool thing to say that you can get better, because a lot of kids don't think that's possible when they've had a long time of struggling. Do you see any changes in how you're doing in school and so forth?
Yeah, I do.
Is it easy, harder? What do you think?
Seems a lot easier now.
What's easier?
Mainly reading, like
Okay.
understanding
Yay.
what I read.
What was the last part?
Right?
What do you think of writing?
I think it's not it's better. It's more readable.
Now, are you guys using, in your classes, are you typing now?
Yeah, because we're doing the online school.
Yeah. How is that going? The
Good.
typing.
I'm really good at typing actually, so it's pretty easy for me.
Wow, lucky you. So a lot of kids don't know how to do that. Good job. I'm so excited that you are actually doing so well right now. I want to thank you for coming forward and making that statement. I'm sure some kids will hear this from their parents if they
I hope
watch
so.
this.
I hope that I do hope, we've always been very open about, we have a big family, so we've been open about our struggles and what.
Uh-oh, you froze. Kasie, you froze. I don't know if you can hear me. Adam, I don't know if we can unfreeze her. I hate to sign off when she's
No, I think it's something on her end. It's frozen for me. Okay.
we
I think she's
lost
back.
you.
I'm sorry. Do you
That's
see
all
me
right.
now? Do you
Yeah.
see me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
he took the first opportunity to disappear. But I said we've always been very open with our journey because I needed it as a mom, to be able to share that. But also I feel that it's so important, if someone else can learn from our experience,
mhm.
that's why, I'm happy to share. I have numerous friends actually that have had similar situations that I've
wow.
referred to, different things based on, whatever their child was experiencing. I had them, and I've shared my primitive reflex books and, shared my resources. I definitely have always referred to Stoll after our wonderful progress, and encourage people, don't ever give up. Ours was hard. We had a rough road in the beginning, but he's doing so amazing now. It was worth every bit of it.
Well, give yourself a lot of brownie points. I remember calling you sometimes after work and you were in the Stoll Center writing a report while Joaquin was in therapy. So, here and there. So I know that's not easy to be a full-time speech pathologist, and on top of that, trying to help your child. So I give you a lot of brownie points. So feel proud because he's doing great.
Yeah.
I already shared the screen while you were either frozen or getting Joaquin, showing the resources you gave us, and I've already done the commercial thing. So we're pretty much done, and what we'll do is probably put this up on Facebook and so forth, which I'll talk to you later about, and I hope that it will help another parent, because think about it, if you had seen or heard this while you were trying to figure things out, wouldn't it have motivated you to try?
Oh, sure. And I think that in going through the process, there were some people that told me that I was wrong, and that I was maybe a few hairs short of a little loony, for what I was thinking. And It was hard to get through that. Fortunately, I had the persistence and I had, enough in me to say, no, I know my child. But here's the difference, Maria, is I'm in the field, right? And I work
Yes.
with kids like this, but a parent who doesn't is not going to know. And so I think it's so important to, to express, don't give up. You know your child better than anyone. And if you think there's something wrong, you've got to look into it.
Pursue it. Make sure.
You got to pursue it.
The thing,
the better.
Yeah, but see, Kasie, you're a speech pathologist, so am I, and I heard about it from you, but I've also heard about it from an occupational therapist that I've worked with, who is an excellent. She's actually taught at Loma Linda University, and so then I start seeing kids with speech motor problems and not being able to move their mouths, and and it always hit me. There's got to be more to this than just say "buh."
Yeah.
More to the therapy, more to the causes, and how far down do we need to go? Skills that come before this, before that, before this. Where do we need to go to see the maximum benefit? And the question in our brains is, can we just go with the traditional stuff, and will they get better? The hard part is that as speech pathologists, we do all this stuff with language and sounds, and it's a trial. To some degree, it's a professional judgment and exposure to ideas, but it's also kind of trial and error. And when you see certain reactions, we figure out certain things, but we don't go that low, if you will, or that young, or in a sense, in our field, to figure out what's going on. Well, the occupational therapists do. So I have a student, he was 11 years old when I started working with them, who was an artic kid, but he really was more than that. And I told the OT what I was seeing. He was slumped in his chair like this. I would push his back in because I knew he needed body support. And she said, Maria, he needs to go get evaluated because I'm pretty sure there's more to it than that. And I described some other things. So yeah, if you have any concerns and you can't get answers here, go somewhere else and keep asking, because I think that's what you did.
I did. I kept asking, I kept reading. I was that crazy person up till 3 a.m, looking up. I am going to find an answer one way or another, and you have to do that. And I'm here, Maria. If any of your listeners, have a question, share my email address. I'm happy to share experience. I'm happy to share, what I know, which is not a lot. But, there's research coming out to your comment about, what do we do? There's research coming out now about vestibular stimulation, vestibular input, and language. So we're starting to reach back into those skills now and starting to understand how these things come together. I integrate these exercises into my speech therapy now.
Oh, that's great.
Even with my older kids, and unfortunately, it's not a practice that is, it's not a school-based therapy, and it's not something I can pull them out for daily, to do with them, unfortunately, but I integrate it as much as I can when I pull them. Absolutely. I make it part of therapy. And they're big kids. I work with big kids. And
I have a question. How do you do that? Give me an example of something you do where you're doing some of this primitive reflex or integration stuff.
So I do, for some of the integration stuff I do, we call lazy eights. So on a big whiteboard, this is more for crossing midline.
Right.
On a large whiteboard with a whiteboard marker, I have them do the number 8, but laying down. And so, you're crossing up and around, down and around, laying down. So we do that. We do it on the chalkboard or on the whiteboard. We write it on chalk on the ground. I tape it out. And if it's cold outside, we do it on tape in the therapy room. I do it outside. I also have balance beams. So we do a lot of movement with balance beams during language articulation. I have trampoline. I do starfish. I do Superman. You name it. Anything I've done for my own kid, I do it in therapy.
Do you do it as a preliminary to everything else?
So I don't assess it, and let me tell you why. Because in the school system, we need an assessment plan, as you know, right? So I'm not going to say that I assess it. But these are the kids that,
you don't have to assess every little thing.
You don't.
You have an end goal, but what we call that is trying to see what the reaction is, so we know what to do.
Yeah, and why not? Why not? Why not? If it makes it more interesting, it's worth it to me, right? To keep my kids engaged. But I do a lot of bounce beam stuff. What was I going to say here? These are the kids, that when they're little, they run kind of funny. they catch
Yeah.
kind of funny, they move kind of funny, that should be a red flag. You know, my kid, when he would hit a piñata, he would swing a bat and stop dead middle and never cross midline.
Wow.
That's a red flag. If you've got a kid like that, that's a red flag.
Right.
You know, crossing midline, that's a big thing. So yeah, we do things like that. Simple things, but in therapy, I make sure to try and include it as much as I can.
I don't think this would mean much, but Ready, Set, Go was a program the district used to use, and we would have kids do all kinds of movements, and they had to be each of the different inputs, like, what am I thinking of? Your sense of where you are in space. What's the word?
Proprioception.
Thank you. Anyway, okay, well, we're going to end this Zoomcast, and thank you so much for coming and bringing your son. That's going to be amazing when others look at it. And then we'll be talking to you soon about the Facebook aspect and other things. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Maria, it was great talking with you. And
Thank
thank
you.
you for letting us share.
Thank you.